Check one, two, three. Hey everybody, it's Michael Helms, also known as Michael the Sound Guy, and this is the Location Sound Podcast. You know, each episode we talk with location sound mixers, boom ops, and other industry pros about the various aspects of recording sound on location, whether it's for feature and independent films, TV commercials, interviews, any time where dialogue from actors is recorded. I started my career in the recording studios in New York City with some of the big artists back in the day, and later on projects for networks like HBO, Sci-Fi Channel, and the Cartoon Network. As time went by, I got out of the studio and began working in production sound. Whether you're a seasoned veteran or just starting out, thanks for joining us. Remember when you first got started doing location sound? From time to time, we talk with up-and-coming location sound recordists who haven't been in the industry that long. Maybe they just got out of school or they've been out for a few years, but they're out there, they're working hard and doing something they enjoy. Here's one of those episodes. My guest today is an independent audio engineer and sound mixer. He does production and post-production sound for film and video, games, and other visual media. So please welcome Luke Pearson.
Hi, how's it going, Michael? Thanks for having me.
Glad you can be here. We always like to jump right in and we say when you're on location, mixing and recording, we always like to ask, what's in your audio bag? So just a rundown from mics to mixer to power distribution and everything in between.
Currently, the main mixer I use is a Mix Pre series from Sound Devices. That's always something I always have because it's just a quality mixer and it's really tight and compact. It's easy to carry around. And I also have the Zoom H5, which I use as a backup recorder for some cases. And then as far as mics, I almost always have a Rode Shotgun mic for booming. I almost always have some Rode wireless lav mics as well. A lot of the stuff depends on the type of shoot we're doing or whatever, and the location of it. Indoor to outdoor comparisons, either way, I try and carry some wind protection for the microphones, including Rycote blimps and windscreens and such like that.
Now, do you ever work with any kind of time code boxes?
I do. The mixers I use don't have any inbuilt time codes, so I usually try and if I'm going to be needing that, I have to use that as far as an HDMI input.
Okay, so just as a trigger?
Right.
Okay. Now, audio bag. What kind of audio bag do you have?
I use an Orca bag.
Okay.
As far as I know, they are one of the most solid brands to use. I actually lent it to a friend of mine who's doing a really big shoot tomorrow, which is not something I would normally do, lending out equipment, but he's a very close friend, so I'm trusting him with that.
I hear you. Now, you mentioned NTG mics. Which one?
I usually use NTG2.
Okay.
Although I occasionally use the NTG3 as well, depending on what kind of shoot it requires.
For our listeners, what's the difference between the two?
Usually I'll use the NTG3 if I need, or I'm more worried about having a stable connection, just because it's a more firmly built casing around the microphone. As far as the listener's view, you're not probably going to hear a whole lot of difference, but it's mainly about being able to capture the most accurate sound without any interference. So if I'm using a longer cable run, for instance, that might be something I use the NTG3 for, just to have a more solid connection between the two.
All right. What are the main audio gigs you like to do?
Probably my favorite type of job to be doing is an independent film, something that is not necessarily being produced for commercial purposes, but is being directed by like an independent director, mainly because that just gives us all the more freedom to be sort of experimenting artistically what we want to do, as opposed to doing commercial work from a company who a lot of times they give us really specific cuts and schedules that we have to stick to. So,
okay. Is there one particular project that kind of stands out?
Earlier this year, back in January, I did a film for a director who I actually have worked with a couple of times. This was while I was in Boston. It was for a 48-hour film project, which is, I've done a lot of those It's kind of how I started. It was one of the most exciting films because for anyone who's done a 48-hour project, doing an entire film in that amount of time is really time crunching. But for this particular one, we actually ended up shooting from about 5 a.m. in the morning, and we cut at about midnight. So we were rolling for about basically the entire day one of the project. And what separated this from my other experiences was that everyone on the team who was there, they had no problem helping out with each other's responsibilities. So for a lot of smaller, low budget films, obviously people kind of have to step up and help each other out. So for this project, I even helped out with some of the post picture editing and stuff like that, even though that's not necessarily my go-to thing. And everyone kind of jumped in here and there. So at the end of it all, it was kind of like everyone gained experience that they wouldn't have normally expected.
I hear you. Yeah, I've worked on a number of projects where you got to wear a lot of different hats, and sometimes I'm running camera, sometimes I'm doing audio, sometimes I'm gripping. So I'm familiar with those projects very well. So
yeah, I love those. Those are a great experience.
Do you ever rent gear for any of your projects?
Occasionally I do. If say I need a particular microphone that I don't own, and if I need to do that, I make sure that I'm going to a reliable source for it. Maybe a company that I've either heard good reviews of, or I've seen good things about. Or occasionally, I have a close-knit couple of buddies of mine who kind of borrow equipment from each other, which I think, as I said earlier, you need to be kind of wary about who you let borrow equipment from and who you borrow from in return.
Right.
But I found that in a lot of situations where you don't want to be purchasing new gear for only one-time use, right, it can be helpful to have acquaintances who will help you out.
What was your worst on-set experience?
Off the top of my head, I would say that it was about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, and we were recording this sci-fi short film, and it was sort of like a zombie apocalypse kind of clashes with sci-fi, and it was just, the entire story was just so terrible. But I was just there to work the sound, so I was trying to do my job. It was just like stuff after stuff kept happening where people came unprepared, the actors showed up late. So I think a lot of it was because the director, this was only his third film, I think. He didn't give out any information except for maybe 24 hours in advance. Since then, I found that I won't work with a director or directors if I feel like they don't know what they're doing. So
you kind of like interview them as well.
Right. Yeah. So when they approach me, I usually come with a list of questions for sure. Yeah.
That's a great, especially for our listeners, that's a great thing to do is, kind of interview whoever, somebody's trying to hire you, and it's like, well, let me, I have a few questions, and then, you can find out right away if they know what's going on, because, you see red flags all over the place.
Exactly. And, it's important to keep your head in it and not just accept something right away just because you're excited or whatever, because you need to get the best experience that you can.
Yeah, some people are just like, oh, it's a gig, they're paying me, I'm in. And then you're like, oh my God.
It's so tempting sometimes. But
so, we always like to be prepared on set, but was there ever a time where you showed up at a gig and you had forgotten something important? And what was it?
Yeah. So that's always a nightmare when you realize something like that. I would say one of the most frustrating times was when I drove a couple hours to start a production day, and I got all the way to the set, and I realized that I had forgotten I use a USB power drive to power one of my mixers, and I had left that back at my home, and so I had to run the entire day off of lithium AA batteries,
Oh my gosh.
which is not ideal because you have to change that. I had to change it out at least 6 or 7 times.
Which mixer was that?
That was a mix pre
Oh my gosh.
mixer.
It'll
Yeah,
go through alkaline, just regular batteries like crazy. I don't know why.
yes,
I don't know why that
yeah.
happens, but I need to talk to them about that because it's like I was like, let me try this, and it was like 20 minutes, 30 minutes because I was running phantom power. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is
Hmm.
not good. So,
Exactly. Yeah. And for the, even if I was only using one phantom powered mic and it was just draining through it. So,
oh wow, yeah, that's
yeah,
crazy.
it's definitely important to have the right or know that your equipment and what your powering needs require. So,
That's true. I always like, especially when you first get it, is you know, hook it up, put all your batteries on it, and fire it up and see what happens and see how long. I just like I'll let it run for hours and hours just to see
yeah.
if it what my battery capacity is. So regarding backups, like after you finish a project, do you back that up and then if you do, how long do you keep it for?
I never get rid of anything actually because I keep it after I'm done with the project. I back it up to a hard drive and I keep one hard drive separately for my own personal uses for whatever I need in the future if I want to review it or whatever. And then I have a separate one for anything that I might need to be transferring to someone else for work purposes. So a lot of the times on projects where we have a tight schedule, we don't always have time to do an entire media transfer after the shoot to the editors. So a lot of times I'll have to do that afterwards, a couple of days after or whatever. And so I definitely back it up to keep it in a safe place, and then it just makes it easier to send them to whoever needs them.
And one of my previous guests, Larry Williams Jr., he is a sound mixer out of South Florida. We were talking, and he said, we were just trying to decide what's a good amount of time to keep it for, and we don't really know. It's like, do you do it for a couple of years? I mean, I had stuff for a long time, and very rarely does somebody want something after a couple of years. But once in a while, somebody was like, "Remember that project we did?" And do you have the files for that? And so yeah, we've been asking like, how long do you keep that stuff? And then a lot of times we'll ask in advance, like, contact your client, say, hey, I've got these backup files, basically saying, hey, if you want them, I'll give them to you, or is it okay to go ahead and delete them?
Hmm.
Larry, he was saying there was a couple times where a client called and he basically saved the client. They're like, oh, we accidentally deleted the files, or he was able to save the day. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, do your clients like to do they ever like to record directly to the camera, or is it just mainly, right into your mixer only?
Usually, for most of the stuff I do, I record directly into the mixer only, but I will keep a backup of that whatever I'm recording, so I have two separate storages for it in case the director wants a copy. I can just hand him a USB of it.
So you're out in the field, you get back. How do you get your next gig? I know word of mouth is great,
Hmm.
but do you use any kind of services?
Well, I would say that actually a lot of the work that I've gotten in the past is thanks to my colleagues that I met while I was in college. I went to Berklee College of Music.
Right.
Something that any music college student hears if they're still in school is that you have to network. I mean, it's definitely the case for me. Yeah, I got a lot of jobs after graduating, which was only about a year ago. As far as anything else, my favorite thing to do to get jobs is to just socialize if I'm on the set of a project or something, because there are so many people there who I don't really, or I found in past projects, I haven't really gotten to know everyone that I've been working with until after the project is done and I see, a post of something cool that they're doing, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know they were doing this or whatever. So I try and talk to everyone that I can find while I'm on a set, because even if they're not directly connected to what I'm doing.
Networking is so powerful. We were talking about that before too. It's people tell you, "Oh yeah, it's good to network," and it's like, no, it's critical that we network. I
Hmm.
mean, every event that is related, and even unrelated, every now and then something happens, and you're like, people are like, "Oh, I didn't know you did that," and
Yeah.
it really is such a valuable thing just to reach out. I always encourage everybody to get business cards, put all your information on there and be able to just hand that at a moment's notice. And it's such a, such a powerful tool. So.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when I first got out of school, I was I was terrified of this whole idea of networking because it seems so daunting. Like, what does that mean? But really, if you're doing your job, then you're interacting with people, and that's a start right there. So, it's really simple.
That's so true. Actually, when I got into podcasting, I started going to all these podcasting events, and podcasters love to network. People just come up to you and meet you and want to know about your show, and it's a fascinating world, but it's a good group of people that I found, just everybody's willing to help and share techniques and tricks and things like that. And I just think it's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You can learn the greatest things just from talking to the person next to you.
So have you ever done any outdoor productions in extreme cold or extreme heat, and how'd your gear hold up?
Well, I would say that the toughest weather conditions that I've had at a project was actually a storm, lightning storm that kind of came over during the middle of our set because we were filming in a state park, and we weren't really prepared for it because it wasn't supposed to rain, but it did. So we had to postpone everything. We moved all the equipment into a nearby building. But so a couple hours we waited and it stopped. We came back out and it turned out that the temperature had dropped to almost I think it was only 4 or 5 degrees above zero.
Oh, wow.
Which, it's nothing compared to Antarctica or something, but this was in Illinois, I think, or Indiana. So, and it was not expected. It was the middle of spring, but we ended up finishing the project on schedule. I would say I was pretty happy with everything. Nothing malfunctioned or anything like that. So.
Well, that's good. No microphone problems or battery issues?
No, not really, which I think is great because I was a little worried because at the time I was still using some really old equipment.
So for people starting off, what recommendations would you give to somebody if they wanted to say, hey, I'm interested in doing location sound recording? What would you recommend for them?
It can happen in a lot of different ways, for sure. So don't narrow your options. Just start talking to people because I found that I was discovering people who I didn't know were into filmmaking or this kind of area until I started talking to them. So it's a collaborative art form. Let's say one of your best friends is a lawyer, but on the side he does short films, anything like that. I would just start getting to know people that you might not know as well. And as far as other things you can do, one of the things that I did was I reached out to my local community. So at the time when I decided I wanted to do this, I was in Boston. So what I did was I went through archives and magazines and I looked for any local film or arts happenings. And I would just go to whatever I could find, whatever meetings or festivals were happening. It's not like I could market myself because at the time I had only been exposed to it 1 or 2 projects. I found it really helpful to sort of immerse myself in the art of filmmaking and everything that comes with it, not just sound, not just recording, which is what I've been brought up into, but everything that comes with film, because in the end, everyone who's involved in it is an artist and everyone has something in common. So I was able to connect with people even just walking up to strangers because we had that similar interest.
Oh, that's great stuff. Are there any common rookie mistakes that you see people making?
There are a couple things I would say are common problems. One thing is that it's always good to have backups for your backup mm-hmm. because one of the misconceptions for, I think, people who are starting out, and certainly happened to me once or twice, was I figured that since I had spent so much time planning what I needed and thinking about everything I needed for the project, that I forgot that there's a gear that goes malfunctioning. So
Right.
everything has the possibility to not work for some reason at some point. Even though I would bring a backup mic, I would forget to bring backup power in for my mixers or something like that. And I see that a lot with sound people, is that they think, oh, I know my equipment really well, so I've worked with it and I've never had a problem, so that means I don't need to worry about it. But that's not the case. You should always be prepared for the worst. The second thing that I see is people who come to a set thinking that they already know everything they need to know about the project and that they're just there to record. And no, you're there to, help the director's vision in making this film. So if something comes up and you need to adjust whatever you're doing because of something the director says, then you need to be prepared for that. For instance, something that might help with that is that I always carry a script of what we're recording, because even if I got my hands full, like let's say I'm monitoring 3 different mixers for some reason, I'm always looking at the scripts too, because it helps me judge what the director is seeing. Because sometimes if you're caught up in your headphones while you're listening to what's being recorded, it's easy to just sort of, get lost in your own in your own head. But you need to be the eyes and ears of the director as well, because they have lots of stuff to worry about, lots of stuff to handle. So if they need something, they need to ask you for something, then you need to be prepared for that.
Yeah, like you said earlier, it's like, part of our job is to help the director, realize his vision or her vision. And sometimes, it's like, now there's some sets, they just want you to record. They don't want your input. They don't want to, but there's situations where, we can make a suggestion and say, you know what, I think this might, this miking technique might work better than say another one. And so, it's good to have that, like you said, choosing the right project to work on, and, by interviewing your, someone who's trying to hire you. So fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes it's hard to speak up, at least in my experience, because you might be afraid, oh, I don't want to interrupt somebody. I'm just the sound guy. But if, sometimes if you are on good terms with the director, then it's great to speak up about a problem you might be thinking about, because that might save a whole lot of trouble in post-production or something.
Absolutely. So you've done production on set, and then you've also done post-production. Which one do you like the most?
Mm-hmm. I would say my favorite thing to do is post-production sound, all the audio editing, stuff like that. Mainly because it's kind of a bridge between the two things I love the most, which is sound editing and filmmaking. And I love being on set and on the production as well. But some days are really long and exhausting, and there's it's not always easy to work with so many people. And for someone like myself who, I get rejuvenated by spending alone time. And a lot of post-production is just being in the studio, mixing or recording, or, ADR and Foley. I love it just being me and the microphone.
Yeah.
So that would probably be my favorite.
Now, have you had the opportunity to do the location recording and then come and do the post-production as well? So you did both?
I have done part of it. I've done part of the editing in post for some projects, because, like you said, there are a lot of times where you have to do multiple jobs. I've never done the entire post-production. I've usually had at least a number of people who are helping. But if I'm sure there might come a day when I have to do the entire thing. So it's good to get the practice in it, because doing, production on one thing and post on another project, those are two different things. But if you're doing the same thing, the stuff you recorded in production, the quality of that is going to determine how much work you have to do in post.
Yeah, no, that's true. When you're out there in the field and you're recording, you know what you have. And so when you get into the studio, I think it helps greatly. I've worked on one project that was, I didn't do the location recording. I'm like, why did they do this? Where is this? Why didn't they record this? And you just kind of think, but when you're out there, you're able to like, what, I know that this would be helpful, in post, and let's record it this way. So that's great. Now you also do, you're a musician as well and a songwriter.
That's right. That's kind of how I got into, or how I discovered sound recording for a film. It's because I was doing music production and engineering studies at Berklee College because I was a songwriter. And after a couple of years of doing that and recording music and being in the music studios, I realized that it wasn't the music that I loved doing. It was the sound recording part of it that I loved doing. So I was like, I should probably find something that's more along my alley. So
I was checking out your website, and there's like an audio demo, and there's music, and then there's like water sound effects and some thunder. And tell me a little bit about that project.
Well, when I decided that I wanted to do sound recording and location recording, I already know a little bit about it because I like to implement sound design into my musical projects. So a lot of what recordings that I had done in the past, I used inside of a song. I used a lot of water and weather sounds, and for an album that I released last year. I kind of think it might be my first and last album.
Okay.
Because it's really, I love, I was brought up as a musician, and I love music, but doing both of these projects, like the film and music part of it, is really tolling sometimes, because I'm doing a full musical session for a band on one day, and then I'm having to drive to a production day the next. So, but it's definitely a great benefit of having both sides of it. So
that's good. That's good. So as we kind of wrap things up here, are there any final words of wisdom you could impart to some of our listeners maybe that are just getting started?
Really just, I would not be afraid of anything that you might want to be doing, anything that you dream of having as a job or anything. Just go for it, because there's not enough time to be wasted on projects that you don't love doing, or that you don't think you're getting anything out of. And as a musician coming up through high school and then college and then graduating and then having to be a freelancer, it can be stressful to put yourself into a new area, into a new search, but I would not postpone anything. So just go forth and start it now.
Great advice. Your website is lukepearsonaudio.com?
Yes.
And that's how people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I just finished redesigning the website myself, and all the information should be up to date. Great.
Well, Luke, I want to say thanks for being on the show today, and we look forward to following your career as things continue to progress. And
Thank you.
So you're in Kentucky?
Yeah, so my home is in Louisville, Kentucky.
All right. So yeah, if you're in the Louisville, Kentucky area, reach out.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
And a big thanks to all of our listeners out there. If you'd like us to discuss a particular topic, please send us an email at locationsoundpodcast@gmail.com. We would love for you to subscribe and leave us a comment. We're available on Apple Podcasts and iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, and on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, remember, sound is half the picture.